closer together.
Thank you all for being here today. On est ici aujourd'hui pour souligner qu'Iran est un moteur majeur du terrorisme, de la répression transnationale et de la violence de masse en Iran. Représentant une menace pour les Canadiens et les civils à l'intérieur comme à l'extérieur du pays. As legal counsel to victims of atrocities and political prisoners, leading parliamentarians from across party lines, and esteemed civil society and community leaders like Nazanin Afshin-Jam, the head of the Iranian Justice Collective. We are also here to underscore how Canada can respond to the atrocities unfolding in Iran. In our respective roles, we have seen the horrifying human stories behind the staggering statistics of abuse in Iran. Iran has the highest rate of child executions in the world, the highest per capita rate of executions more generally, the highest rate of state hostage takings, and the highest per capita rate of imprisoned journalists in the world. This has real and tangible costs for Canadians. It meant the murder of Montreal photojournalist Zara Kazemi, the kidnappings of professors Mariam Mombaini and others in Saeed Malikpour, the killing of Canadian passengers on flight PS752, the murders of 8 Canadians on October 7th, 2023, and now the atrocities that are ongoing in the streets of Iran as we speak, where authorities have confirmed to have again killed Canadians, and that will likely continue without global intervention. None of these Canadians receive the justice they deserve, and their killers and kidnappers enjoy impunity. They are now committing these crimes again in the streets of Iran as we meet here today on the Hill. 2 separate United Nations independent expert bodies have determined that the actions of these perpetrators may constitute crimes against humanity. Canada has the authority to investigate and prosecute these crimes. The criteria set out by the RCMP for opening a structural investigation has clearly been met. Announcing the opening of an investigation would send a message of solidarity to victims, accountability to violators, and assert the value of Canadian citizenship. It would protect our sovereignty by establishing consequences for murdering Canadians and demonstrating that their murderers are not welcome on Canadian soil. Canada has an opportunity and a duty to lead on behalf of the victimized Canadians left without justice, on behalf of the brave Iranians on the front lines of the fight for our common humanity, on behalf of our country's foundational principles of the rule of law and human rights that are under assault. I'll now pass the podium to my colleague, Kimberly Lenz, to speak about our other calls for action of the Canadian government in common cause.
Thank you, Brandon. We are calling on the Canadian government to lead decisively in response to the Islamic Republic's widespread crackdown against peaceful protesters and its external aggression abroad. The sheer scale of the regime's systematic brutality is unprecedented. By conservative estimates, at least 33,000 Iranians have been massacred, with credible assessments ranging far higher. Experts describe it as the worst mass killing in Iran's modern history. Others conclude it meets the legal threshold for crimes against humanity. Alongside this, Canada and liberal democracies face escalating threats from the Islamic Republic and its proxies, including growing transnational repression and lethal threats against Canadians. This is an historic and pivotal moment. Canadian leadership would build on mounting political momentum to deny the regime the freedom to operate with impunity. We urge Canada to target the architect of these threats, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, by dismantling their networks at home and abroad through 2 key measures. First, Canada should promote and support proscription of the IRGC as a terrorist entity with like-minded partners, particularly the United Kingdom, where parliamentarians are pressing for the rapid adoption of enabling legislation and the group's designation. Second, it should deepen coordination with its allies, including the European Union, which unanimously agreed on its designation last week. Enhanced intelligence sharing, law enforcement coordination, judicial collaboration, and sanctions alignment would strengthen national and international security. Iranians continue to rise up against the regime's tyranny and to risk their lives in pursuit of a secular, democratic Iran grounded in basic human rights. Canada must respond with urgency and resolve.
Good afternoon. I'm happy today to be standing here with my colleagues and friends endorsing the work of our subcommittee on human rights and the recommendations going forward which demand additional action from Canada. I will also be doing a statement in the House recognizing the decision by the European Union to finally designate the IRGC as a terrorist organization. Canada designated IRGC last year, and we are now expecting and waiting for UK to do a similar action. These listings must also, though, be accompanied by further steps, closing the regime's diplomatic facilities, expelling its agents, cutting off its financial networks, and recognizing the right of Iran's youth to resist tyranny in pursuit of a democratic republic grounded in human rights. Leadership shown by Canada previously has been helpful, has been recognized, the sanctions that are on Iran, but there is much more to be done. And I believe the recommendations that were just referenced and some others that you will hear, important work that Canada needs to do. We're a sovereign country, and we stand against all of the atrocities that continue to happen in Iran, the innocent people that are massacred, whether it's by hanging or being shot in the streets while they are protesting. All of us as Canadians need to stand together, and we're standing for one purpose, for human rights, for freedom, and for the Iranian people to be able to live in a democracy. I thank all of my colleagues for being here, and of course the Raoul Wallenberg Association and all of the work that they continue to do to stand up for human rights around the world. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shuvaloy Majumdar. I'm the Vice Chair of the Subcommittee for International Human Rights today and a Conservative Member of Parliament from Calgary Heritage. For over 20 years, I have fought for the Iranian people in the field, in the academy, as an advisor in government, and now today as a Member of Parliament. This is a moment perhaps as significant as the Berlin Wall falling itself. Can you imagine with me for a moment what the region and the world might look like without the IRGC and the Supreme Leader's ambitions for terrorist control in the region, for nuclear ambitions to terrorize the world, and for the subjugation that he has been responsible through his organizations to repress the rights of his own people? Can you imagine for a moment what a world of peace might look like if we listen to the call of the Iranian people, of whom tens of thousands have now been brutally massacred? And in Ottawa, we have calls from parliamentarians, colleagues that have shared this stage with me today, but a call from a government is long wanting and long silent, and a horrific event for Canada not to be a moral leader today. Watching with the horror the events that are coming out of Iran, we have now seen a regime that has turned on itself and a world waiting for action. There was a time in this capital when Professor Erwin Kotler, Senator from Liberal MP Michael Levitt, and many others led Iran Accountability Week. That was nearly a decade ago. Since then, it has disappeared, seemingly abandoned in favor of a normalization with a brutal regime rather than the accountability the regime deserves. The people of Iran demand the same things that every free nation deserves: a secular and democratic government, full respect for human rights, and an end to the despotic dictatorship imposed on Iran since 1979. The protesters in Iran are not seeking minor reforms or superficial changes. They are demanding regime change. The complete dismantling of the clerical military dictatorship has proven irreformable despite the shell games that the Supreme Leader has presented the world over the last decades. We must go beyond issuing statements. We must act. This means supporting independent international investigations and treating the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization in practice, not just in name. So, our calls to action. First, expand and aggressively enforce targeted sanction, including Magnitsky-style sanctions, against those responsible for repression and for mass killings. Second, fully enforce the IRGC terrorist listing through investigations in Canada, asset freezes, seizures, and prosecutions, and strengthen our immigration system to bar regime officials, affiliates, and family members from coming to Canada and seeking refuge here. Third, direct law enforcement and security agencies to investigate foreign interference, transnational repression, and money laundering linked to the regime in Iran. Fourth, ensure that the Foreign Influence and Transparency Registry includes real penalties, not a $50 fine, and real enforcement like jail time and public reporting on outcomes. Fifth, swiftly implement a robust foreign agent registry that actually keeps Canadians safe. Sixth, work with international partners to pursue independent investigations into the mass killings and abuses during the January 2026 crackdown. Seventh, expel from Canada the individuals acting as agents of the regime and secure our borders so they can't seek refuge in Canada in the first place. And eighth, freedom in today's world is impossible without free access to information. Canada must support internet freedom as it did a decade ago, counter the regime's communication blackouts, and protect Iranian Canadian activists from threats and intimidation here on Canadian soil. Finally, to conclude, I am so grateful to the incredible people at the Raoul Wallenberg Centre, Professor Kotler, Brandon Silver, and their entire team for bringing this team together. I'm so grateful to my friend and colleague Nazanin Afshin-Jam MacKay, who for decades has been a powerful proponent for the Iranian people, all of them and their rights and their dignity. So let me support now the calls to action today. Sanction the supreme leader. Encourage allies like the United Kingdom to act swiftly, as Europe has finally done, and designate the IRGC as a terrorist organization. And finally, pursue justice and accountability, including opening a structural investigation into crimes against humanity by the clerical military dictatorship of Iran's officials. Thank you very much.
Bonjour, je suis Julie Srgo, sénatrice indépendante, et donc je me joins à ce groupe. Le Canada se doit d'agir pour montrer son soutien au peuple iranien qui s'est soulevé contre le régime des ayatollahs. Des manifestations pourtant légitimes contre les autorités iraniennes ont été réprimées férocement, dans le sang. Certains parlent de massacres orchestrés par l'État. On estime qu'il y a des dizaines de milliers de morts, on ne sait pas combien. Le Canada, vous le savez, a déjà inscrit le corps des gardiens de la Révolution, le bras armé du pouvoir iranien, au registre des organisations terroristes. L'Union européenne vient de faire de même et nous espérons que la Grande-Bretagne suive bientôt. Nous voulons que nos alliés soient aussi convaincus que nous qu'il faut sanctionner le corps des gardiens de la Révolution. Donc, nous voulons aussi nous assurer que ces complices iraniens réfugiés au Canada sont démasqués et qu'on ferme la frontière aux autres gardiens de la Révolution qui chercheraient refuge au Canada. J'appuie donc l'initiative lancée aujourd'hui et je remercie mes collègues, particulièrement la Fondation Raoul Wallenberg, d'avoir organisé cet événement aujourd'hui. Merci.
Today, the world must understand one simple truth. What is happening in Iran is a mass atrocity. At least 33,000 innocent, peaceful protesters have been killed, 300,000 injured, and tens of thousands arrested in just a few days, largely out of the world's sight due to a deliberate internet blackout designed to hide the evidence. Ce qui se passe en Iran est une atrocité de masse. The United Nations fact-finding mission concluded that the Islamic Republic in Iran committed crimes against humanity during the last round of protests, during the Women Life Freedom protests. The scale and speed of this violence are unprecedented. Former UN prosecutor in The Hague, Payam Akhavan, referenced this as the Iranian Holocaust. Wounded peaceful protesters are hunted down in hospitals and finished off with bullets to the head. Men, women, and children are executed, tortured, disappeared, and buried in secret graves. Doctors are arrested and in some cases sentenced to death for treating the wounded. Lawyers are detained simply for defending their clients. Families, after rooting through piles and piles of body bags in overflowing warehouses are forced to pay for the bullets used to kill their children and forced into silence. With the level of coordinated violence, machine guns used on unarmed protesters, shoot-to-kill orders from senior officials, and the hiring of militias from other countries to kill innocent Iranians, statements of concern or condemnation no longer suffice. They do not stop bullets, executions, or mass graves. Les mots de condamnation ne suffisent plus. Nous avons besoin d'actions concrètes. Canada has been a leader before by closing the IRI embassy and listing the IRGC on the terrorist list. Canada can continue to take leadership and use all tools, diplomatic, legal, economic, and humanitarian, to protect lives. As an Iranian Canadian linked with a network of over 100 Iranian diaspora groups, I support the Raoul Wallenberg Foundation's recommendation that our allies list the IRGC on the terrorist list, particularly the United Kingdom, and that Canada and RCMP initiate structural investigations into individuals in Canada implicated in crimes against humanity in Iran, ensuring accountability and preventing perpetrators from finding safe haven here. This will be echoed in my remarks at the Subcommittee on Human Rights here in Parliament today, along with other recommendations like the responsibility to protect. History will not ask whether we issued enough condemnations. It will ask whether we acted when the evidence was clear and the warning signs unmistakable. Let us not have to repeatedly say never again. Let us instead say not ever when we have the capacity to stop an atrocity. If the international community, including Canada, has the political will, we have the capacity to stop an atrocity and save lives. Si nous avons la volonté politique, nous avons la capacité de mettre fin à cette atrocité et de sauver des vies. Merci.
Thank you, Nazanin, for your very eloquent and moving remarks and call to action, and for MPs Shuvaloy Majumdar, Judy Srgo, and Senator Mivil Deschênes, again representing both houses and both the Liberal and Conservative parties in joining this clarion call on behalf of the brave people of Iran and for justice and human rights. We want to emphasize collectively also the importance of Canada speaking out for political prisoners, and I'd be remiss not to mention one of the longest held ones, Dr. Ahmed Reza Jalali, who has been imprisoned for over a decade now, sitting on death row, sentenced to execution, simply for being a doctor and saving lives. In the way that Nazanin described, that lawyers are being criminalized for serving as counsel, doctors being arrested for treating patients, journalists being detained for reporting the news. There is a full repression of fundamental human rights, and these political prisoners are a case study of the weaponization of the judiciary and the targeting of the Iranian people, and speaking on their behalf can save their lives. And at the same time, we need to name and shame the perpetrators. It stands out that the architect of all of this repression, Ayatollah Khamenei, is not on Canada's sanctions list. We call on the Canadian government and reaffirm this call. The Wallenberg Centre, in partnership with Canadian, Iranian civil society organizations like the Iranian Justice Collective, have made targeted Magnitsky sanctions submissions to Global Affairs Canada, including those responsible for these crimes, calling for them to be banned from Canada, for their assets to be seized, and for them to face accountability. That has not yet been done, so we reiterate that call, starting with Ayatollah Khamenei. And we are now opening the floor to any press questions, and please do feel free for anybody tuning in and online as well to follow up thereafter for any interview requests with any of the speakers joining us today.
It's my understanding that the EU and UK are moving forward on listing the IRGC as a terrorist entity. Is that welcome news, or?
So we're particularly encouraged that the European Union has indeed confirmed that they are moving forward joining Canada in this effort to limit the ability of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps to both continue the atrocities in Iran and to continue their transnational repression abroad. So it's both a way to protect our own sovereignty and to stand up for the Iranian people. We would encourage the Canadian government to intervene in these processes to express their support. While we're delighted that the European Union has done so, the United Kingdom is now considering joining this, and it would be important for Canada, as a country that has already initiated this effort, to intervene both at a ministerial level. The foreign minister should consider undertaking to the British Foreign Secretary that Canada is supportive of this move. It certainly serves Canadian interests. It means we would not be going it alone, and we could coordinate more closely with a key Five Eyes intelligence partner and key NATO member. And similarly, while the European Union is indeed moving ahead, it's important that Canada make the most of this effort and join our European allies in coordinating sanctions, in coordinating law enforcement, in coordinating intelligence sharing, lest this become a siloed effort. And we saw a very helpful indicator of this. When Canada was chair of the G7, commendably, there was a joint statement, quite a rare one, issued on Iranian transnational repression interference and the role of the IRGC in targeting not only their own citizens, which they're doing so brutally as was described earlier, but in targeting our citizens across the G7. That statement was an important starting point for coordination and collaboration. We now need to move beyond that and work within the G7 to ensure not only that all G7 members, like the UK, have designated the IRGC, but then there's the important follow-up of joint law enforcement, investigations, prosecutions, sanctions, and the like. Would anybody else like to comment?
Just since Canada designated the IRGC a terrorist entity in 2024, has there been any tangible results from that designation, or are they lacking on the Enforcement Act part of this? And I'd love to hear from members of Parliament on this as well.
So give the floor to any.
Thank you very much for the question. It is my understanding that extensive work has been done following the designation by Canada of the IRGC in tracking down people in Canada that some of them have been deported, and there are active court cases ongoing as a result of the work that Canada has taken. Is there more to do? There is much more to do. Could Canada be much more aggressive in pursuing these things? I hope as a result of the ongoing work that's happening today, but the work that's being done by many of my colleagues, the demands on our government to take more action will, at the end of the day, help us all achieve what we want, which is the freedom and democracy for the Iranian people. Thank you.
When the IRGC was listed on the terrorist list, it was a wonderful first step for the Iranian Canadian community. However, we feel somewhat disappointed in terms of not seeing much in terms of enforcement. I believe there's only been one deportation since, and it's true there's others that are being investigated right now to be deported, but we don't want just them to be deported back. We want structural investigations. We want Canada to use universal jurisdiction to actually prosecute these perpetrators for crimes against humanity. It is very frustrating as Iranians to be walking the streets and see our oppressors alongside with us and having no real tools to put them behind bars. Even though we've reported many of them, we see them at our local gyms, we see their sons and daughters spending millions of dollars in expensive houses, cars, living lavish lifestyles, while our people back home can't afford even a loaf of bread. So definitely the enforcement part is lacking, and I hope the Canadian government puts more resources into concentrating on the enforcement side of things.
Do you think with recent protests, we also had widespread protests in Iran in 2022, do you think the tide is turning on this regime and this presents a real opportunity to push hard on it?
Oh, absolutely. This is the end of the regime. There is no turning back. This is our chance. 40,000 more people have been killed during the last few days during these massacres. And the Iranian people have spoken. They will no longer return to a system where there's only reforms. They want a complete change of regime. Millions of people have risen up, not just in Iran, but if you saw the news in Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, hundreds of thousands of people have stood up, and the regime knows they are on their last legs. And that's why the Iranian people are so looking forward to seeing if President Trump will follow through on his promises to act and intervene, because that's what they're relying on to finally topple this regime.
With respect to the UK, it is my understanding that the government is moving forward with new legislation to prescribe state-linked entities. Also, my understanding is that they will not fast-track that legislation, and they have also not announced whether they'll designate the IRGC. Also, a cross-party group of parliamentarians is pushing for the legislation to be adopted swiftly, and so we would also like to encourage that swift adoption.
We have one more question. Dylan Robertson, please go ahead.
Hi there. A question for the three parliamentarians. I'm wondering what advice Canada should be communicating to the US and Israel in terms of any type of a military intervention. We did see last August the attack on Evin prison. It killed roughly 80 people. It's not quite clear the reason Israel gave for that. I'm wondering, just when we see US assets being moved into the region, what do the three of you think that Canada should be communicating right now to Washington and to Israel if they are going to do military force against the regime?
Right now, the people of Iran, to the point of a lot of my colleagues, especially in terms of what Nazanin Afshin-Jam MacKay had said, are the embodiment of an ancient light piercing through a 47-year-old tyranny. Theirs is a story of the lion and the sun. Theirs is a story of a people reclaiming their history, their contributions to humanity, despite an occupation of a clerical military dictatorship that has repressed them and caused so much grief across the world for so long. Friends and partners around the world are looking at how they can support the Iranian people in their fight for freedom. And there are many conversations that are underway for that, from what I can gather. But of course, the government of Canada does not strike me to be on the top of the list of people who are working with friends and partners to try and find ways to help support the Iranian people. So my perspective is this. I think that what we need to focus on now is giving voice to the tens of thousands that were massacred in Iran, to the hundreds of thousands that have been tortured, shot at, and injured through horrific violence, to the political prisoners that are being held in places like Evin prison, and to support the Iranian people's aspiration for their freedom as best as possible. This is their fight against the regime, and they have friends.
Do you have a follow-up question, Dylan?
I was curious that the other two had perspective on advice such as, bombing a prison full of dissidents, if that's the right move, if there's other
I appreciate
things
your
Canada...
perspective. I'm going to interrupt you because what I hear now is propaganda coming from the regime. The regime will use every opportunity to avoid actual accountability by their own people or by the friends the people of Iran have from around the world to try and exploit the campaign against an IRGC regime that was fomenting unprecedented instability across the Middle East is a noble effort. This is a regime that has sent missiles and bombs and drones across the region. They have stated their objective is to destroy the state of Israel. They have pursued nuclear ambitions, which finally the world had enough of. And they have used all of these ambitions at the expense of the people in Evin prison and prisons across the country. So IRGC and Basij efforts to suppress their people have to be confronted at every turn. I'm grateful it was done then.
I need to say just one thing. Right now, among those that are in body bags in the warehouses, there's women and children that are missing. And what's coming out of Iran is that the regime of the IRI is holding these women and children back so that if there is a foreign intervention, they will place these bodies in schools, hospitals, what have you, or those places where they're and implant bombs so that it looks like it's actually the fault of the United States, Israel, or other countries. So by pinpointing just that one incident of Evin prison where prisoners were killed, I don't believe you have the correct numbers. We don't know exactly what happened that day, but I do know that those allies and partners that were involved have always been clear that they will do targeted strategical strikes on the IRGC command and control, and hopefully will take Ayatollah Khamenei as well.
And my follow-up is for Ms. Afshin-Jam MacKay. I'm just wondering if you could speak to what we've heard from Iran in recent weeks. There was a lot more communication before the internet restrictions. Those restrictions appear to have gotten increasingly tight, especially as the media attention has strained to other conflicts in the world. I'm just wondering if you could give us a sense of how this has evolved over the past month, especially after the spotlight shifted.
Sorry, I'm just going to clarify. There's the question about, has the internet opened up and communication?
Has the internet opened up at all? And also just what are we seeing in terms of the repression there? Has the nature of that repression changed? Has the scale of it changed? Because there was a lot of attention probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and then it shifted elsewhere. And I guess I'm just wondering if you could kind of fill in that picture.
Yes. Well, the Islamic Republic regime, what they do when they want to do a mass murder, as we'd seen in past protests, they shut off the internet, and that's where they carry out these massacres. This time, as I mentioned, there's been tens of thousands killed in that time. Slowly, the internet has come back on, but just enough for family members to make a few minutes calls to their families. And thanks to internet technologies by Starlink and Canadian companies like Siphon, which allows for internet communication through VPNs, through this new technology called Conduit, we're starting to get those imagery and video footage out. Now, when millions of people were out in the street and they were being gunned down by a machine gun, now that has stopped. However, now there's a silent massacre taking place. In prisons right now, they're injecting political prisoners with unknown lethal substances. They're released, and days later, they're dead. Or they're hunting people down in hospitals, and if they see anybody that was injured, or they have checkpoints now in the streets, they make people take off their clothes, and if they see injuries, they're detained, and what we're told is that they're finishing them off with a bullet to the head, and they're being put in mass unknown graves. This is the situation right now, so it is still extremely urgent. The massacre continues, but in a different way. The way that the Islamic regime always wants, which is in silence, away from the eyes of the international community.
Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Merci. C'est ce qui conclut cette conférence de presse.